Good evening, and thank you all for attending tonight. As you may know, tonight's event is one of the signature events leading up to my investiture on November 10th, so it's a particular honor for me to welcome you on behalf of our great university to this event tonight. And it's truly an honor for us to host such a distinguished panel of nationally recognized figures in the world of journalism and politics. And also, we're going to be introducing a number of people here tonight. Let me first acknowledge Charles Overby of Newseum fame. Charles is in the audience here, and let's acknowledge him. And let me extend also a special thank you to Mississippi Today for co-sponsoring this event. Mississippi Today is a nonpartisan, nonprofit digital news and information resource that aggressively and objectively covers state and local government affairs and community issues, including education, health, economic development, poverty, race, as well as Mississippi's social culture. And I fully support that objective, and I hope all of our University of Mississippi students and community members will seek to understand societal issues through an unbiased lens. And I think that phrase, seek to understand, is really a key one. In fact, when I spoke to the incoming class at this year's fall convocation just last month, I asked them to listen carefully to different points of view and to challenge their own, because by challenging our own ideas, we learn how to clarify them. I told the students that when you cannot persuasively argue for the other person's point of view, that often indicates you don't really, truly understand or appreciate the issues or what you yourself think you stand for. So it's especially important to embrace the principles of listening and critical thinking during an election year like we're in today. And tonight's event is a reminder of the value of doing so. So in a moment, I'm going to have the honor of introducing Curtis Wilkie, who will introduce our panelists tonight. But before Curtis does that, I'd like to take an opportunity to thank all of our guests for being here tonight. Our panelists, former Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, NBC News Chairman and founder of Mississippi Today, Andy Lack, longtime anchor and now special correspondent for NBC, Tom Brokaw, and former Tennessee Congressman Harold Ford, and our moderator, Maggie Wade. It's always great to have them back on campus, and they will all tonight use big words and speak in long sentences. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Curtis Wilkie, the Overby Fellow and Kelly G. Cook Chair of Journalism. Curtis was born in Greenville, Mississippi. He was educated in Mississippi's public schools and graduated from the University of Mississippi with a bachelor's in journalism. He served as the reporter and editor on the staff of the Clarksdale Press Register from 1963 to 1969 at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. He received a congressional fellowship from the American Political Science Association. Curtis also worked as a legislative aide in the offices of Senator Walter Mondale and Indiana Representative John Bradamus. He served as reporter and editor on the staff of the News Journal papers in Wilmington, Delaware in the early 70s, and joined the staff of the Boston Globe in 1975. There, he served as a national and foreign correspondent for that paper until retirement at the end of the 2000 presidential campaign. He also served as White House correspondent from 1977 to 1982. Curtis served as chief of the Globe's Washington Bureau, and in 1984 established the Globe's Middle East Bureau and lived in Jerusalem for 3 years, starting in 1984. He covered numerous wars and conflicts and has written articles for several national magazines He was the author of several venerated books, including Assassins, Eccentrics, Politicians, and Other Persons of Interest, 50 Pieces from the Road, The Fall of the House of Zeus, The Rise and Ruin of America's Most Powerful Trial Lawyer, and Dixie, a personal odyssey through events that shaped the modern South. Historian Douglas Brinkley wrote about Curtis, "Over the past 4 decades, no reporter has critiqued the American South with such evocative sensitivity and bedrock honesty as Curtis Wilkie." The University of Mississippi is incredibly lucky to have Curtis with us tonight. Please give a warm Ole Miss welcome to Curtis Wilkie.
Chancellor, thank you. That was far longer than I deserved. Anyway, we appreciate you being with us tonight. I know you're being overworked this weekend, so thank you for joining us, and we're glad to have Sharon Vitter, our First Lady, here today. You get me tonight because Charles Overby is speaking elsewhere, so that's your misfortune, but the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics is delighted to be co-sponsors with Mississippi Today, and I also wanted to recognize the chairman, Donna Barksdale. Glad to have you with us, Donna. I'm going to leave the real formal introduction to the panel to Maggie, but I want to just explain how NBC kind of wound up here at Ole Miss, and I can tell tales about Haley Barbour too, if Haley doesn't watch out. But you may or may not know, but Tom, I looked it up today, 16 years ago today, you came to the Grove for the first time for a party and an Ole Miss football game. And you've been coming back repeatedly, time and time again, and we're just glad to have you. Tom, he comes for football games, he comes for baseball games, he comes just for fun with his wife Meredith. He taught for a week here at the Honors College, and most recently he was our commencement speaker this spring. And he is one of our own, and we're just delighted. Andy Lack, we've adopted you too. Andy, I learned, he's got Mississippi roots himself. His great-grandfather was an early mayor of Greenville. And several years ago, Andy began trying to establish his roots here, and along the way he discovered Oxford. And since that time, he also has been a very frequent visitor to Mississippi and to Oxford. He's become a great friend of the Meek School of Journalism and New Media. And as you have heard, he's a driving force behind Mississippi Today, and basically is its founder. And one other thing, Andy is our good luck charm. We're going to take him to all Ole Miss baseball games. He spoke at the journalism commencement a few years ago, and afterwards I took him over to our baseball game, and we were trailing all the way through. Someone hit a pinch hit home run in the 9th inning, tied it. We had a walk-off home run that won it in about the 11th inning. So fast forward to this year, he comes down with Tom for Tom's commencement appearance, and we go to the Ole Miss baseball game. We sit with Chancellor Vitter, and damned if we don't hit a walk-off home run again, come from behind. It was a great scene to see the Chancellor and Andy and Tom, and we're all high-fiving, and Andy says, "I did it, I'm the one responsible." So when it gets tough, we're going to get you back here. Haley Barbour obviously needs no introduction on this campus, but I should tell you that I'm old enough to remember when Haley was in elementary school and used to come up for football weekends, and he was kind of a rugrat visiting his older brother, Jeppy, who was a classmate of mine, and he was doing destruction even then at the SA house, warming up for future years when he was here. And Haley's a true son of Ole Miss, and Haley, always great to have you back. And then Harold Ford, we're delighted to have you here. Memphis is kind of our capital of North Mississippi, and despite what demographics tell you, there are a few Democrats down here, and we're glad to see you here tonight too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie, who'll do a much better job, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, and what a wonderful audience. We have to say thank you to the Ole Miss family. We are on the site where the first presidential debate of 2008 was held. Isn't that awesome? Right here on this campus. And right now we want to begin. I'm giving brief introductions of each of our panelists because you've heard something about them, and we want to get right into our discussion. Presidential politics in the South. And this is a conversation, it's a discussion, and we hope that the audience will get involved. We want to hear from you as well, have questions from you. First of all, it is my honor to introduce, and we're doing it in alphabetical order, the former governor of the state of Mississippi and one of the most successful chairs of the Republican National Committee who guided this state through the devastation of Hurricane Katrina so wonderfully. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable former Governor Haley Barbour. Our next panelist came into our living rooms each evening as the anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News, an award-winning journalist and author who introduced many and reminded others of the greatest generation. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tom Brokaw. Our next panelist served for 5 years as a member of Congress representing our neighboring state, Tennessee, an accomplished author who lends his expertise on politics, government, and social issues with national media outlets. Ladies and gentlemen, Harold Ford, Mr. Harold Ford. Mr. Harold Ford, and we have a lot in common. He has young kids, and I have a young grandchild, so we're glad about that. And sitting next to me, you've heard so much about him. He is the chairman of NBC News. His vision and dedication to this state helped bring Mississippi Today to Mississippi, our great state. Emmy award-winning, 16 I understand, and he has guided journalists as well as news programs like 60 Minutes, and now, of course, NBC News, and he's here tonight to help us shed light on this very important topic. Please, again, give a warm welcome to Andy Lack. Now let's get to our first question, and feel free to jump in. We have heard over and over again that this is the most unusual presidential election that we've ever had in the history of this country. What makes it so unusual? Is it that the voters have changed, or is it that the voters are looking for something different when it comes to leadership?
Well, I think it's a combination of both those things. When you say it's the most unusual in American history, you've got to remember what it was like in the early days of this wonderful federal republic of ours. It was pretty raucous then as well. What has changed, in my judgment, is that the party structure in both parties, but especially in the Republican Party at the moment, does not have nearly the claim on the candidates or on the campaign that it once had. You have essentially a renegade candidate in the Republican Party, and Donald Trump. He came into the race. People have to stop and remember, better known than all the other conventional candidates who were all office holders. He'd been a reality television star. He took an entirely different approach to running for office. He really dismissed the idea of having a very expensive television campaign. Instead, he campaigned almost entirely on Twitter and on the access that he had to cable television and talk radio. On the other side, Hillary Clinton, you cannot say is a new Democrat. She's been around for 30 years. And people find in many instances, especially the younger people, that she's too familiar to them. They were looking for something different. So we have this odd mix going on, both in terms of personalities and the construct of the campaign. And it's very hard to know how it's going to turn out. And I say that because I have a favorite operating theory of presidential politics, especially, that a lot of my friends and family are tired of hearing me say, but it holds up. It's called the UFO theory. The unforeseen will occur. It's happened several times in the course of this campaign. It can happen between now and November 7th, because we're not playing by the usual rules. The conventions have been thrown out in terms of the normal conventions of a presidential campaign, in my judgment.
Mr. Ford and Governor Barbour, we'd like to hear from you as well.
Well, I think that presidents are elected as a response to the person in the office. President Obama won. In a lot of ways, people had grown fatigued with the war with President Bush, had grown fatigued even with the economy, and Obama was something fresh and new. It's important to note that he defeated Hillary Clinton in that primary 8 years ago. Some argue that if Bernie Sanders were a younger person and might have been better known and didn't make himself known as a socialist, that he might have defeated her in this primary. Republicans and Democrats have shifted a little bit in this race. Republicans have been known over the years to be the party that takes the person who is next. Democrats did that this time. I don't think Trump is as different as some give him credit for or criticism for. If you look at the majority of the polls, they show the plurality of Americans consider themselves neither Democrat or Republican. Now, Trump was a Democrat 8 years ago. He was a Democrat 4 years. I've been to fundraisers with him supporting Democrats in New York and other places. But he ran as a Republican this time. In many ways, he's an imperfect vessel for this notion that the country wants a third party or something independent. But he represents that. I share my friend and one of my mentors' position. I don't know what's going to happen in this race. I'm for someone in this race, but I'm not convinced that I understand fully what's happening out in the public. I did not think that Donald Trump, last year around this time I felt this way, but over the summer, I remember watching him last summer. It was funny. We'd get to our little summer home and flip the television on and see, what did he say today? Or what did he say that week? By Thanksgiving or Christmas, I thought there was something really there. And I still think, even though I thought Secretary Clinton, who I support, had a great last Monday, I'm not convinced that if Mr. Trump does perform well, or if he's able to perform well and show some discipline, and again, if he's able to extend it, he did well the first 30 minutes. If he can go another 30 minutes, give him an hour and they get an hour and a half in the last one, this thing will go, I think, right to the very end. So I agree with Mr. Brokaw on that.
You know, Harold's younger than the rest of us, but all of us have been around a lot of presidential campaigns. And none of us have ever seen anything like this. Hey, look, I remember I bumped into a guy I worked with in Reagan White House a few weeks ago, and he said, hey, have you ever seen anything like this? I said, no, I've never seen anything like this. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. He said, you know, the nominating process has become so weird and peculiar, they've had to create a new term to describe it. Electile dysfunction. It's some of us are hoping Pfizer could come through by November the 8th, but it remains to be seen. Seriously, a lot of this has to deal with the fact that the American people are mad and they're scared. About 2/3 of Americans say that they think the country's going in the wrong direction. That number's been over 60% for more than 3 years. And let me just make the point, fewer than 40% of people in the United States are Republicans. So there are a whole lot of people that are not Republicans that think the country's going in the wrong direction. And that drives a lot of this. It drives the anger, the fear. It drives the people who are mad about conditions, the weakest economic recovery since the 1940s. 48.8% of adult Americans have a full-time job. Most do not. Our unemployment rate has dropped primarily because of people who've quit looking for jobs, not because of people who got jobs. So you can understand why they're mad. And candidly, at the end of the day, a lot of people look at Donald Trump and they say, I want to send Washington the bird, and this is the most magnificent middle finger I can imagine. I don't think people want to destroy Washington, but they want to disrupt Washington. This is a change election.
Well, I would offer two other observations that have been, this team covered the waterfront pretty good, but from where I'm sitting, the rich guy didn't spend any money and had the best result. If you looked at what was around him, there was nobody around him. There were no advisors, there were no pollsters, although he was, as we all know now, quite interested with the polls. But that said, if you went to visit him, as many of my colleagues did over at the Trump Tower, you would go into essentially an empty room with no frills would be overstating the gracious amenities that were offered you when you arrived. There was nothing there. It was the leftover apprentice studio. And the second, so money didn't talk in this election the way 16 of the 17 candidates on the Republican stage that began thought it might. The second piece is the more obvious one, which is this was billed as the Twitter, potentially the Twitter election, the Snapchat election. In this case, I think Mr. Trump would say it, Twitter was his best way of communicating without the need of anyone else helping him shape his message. And if you're in the press, getting that unfiltered Donald every morning, starting generally at 6 o'clock, and often a Twitter avalanche, a tirade of comments, which fell again the other day after the debate, we hadn't seen anything like that. And arguably we won't quite again. Who knows? But in any case, social media, Tom is quite good on this, really, for the first time, penetrated, from my perspective, the way we were communicated and the way information was shared.
Well, let's talk about social media. Let's begin with Mr. Lack and Mr. Brokaw. It's difficult for news outlets to stay on top of everything that's happening out there. How do we keep the balance with social media as well as journalism, the comments that journalists make using social media and covering this campaign?
Well, the arena of journalism is very wide, not very deep in the judgment of a lot of people, and it has a lot of new elements. And it's very hard to sort it out if you're a layman out there about what counts and what doesn't count. So my advice is to viewers and readers is that construct for yourself a kind of filtration system. Put as much effort into finding out which of those sources you can trust over the long haul as you would into buying a new flat screen television or a pair of running shoes or a car. You've got to be an informed consumer in this society. You also have to be an informed voter. We have a wonderful woman who works for us at our ranch in Montana. She's out there because she wants that isolated way of life. Not particularly political, extraordinarily competent in everything she does, but she goes online. And twice a week in the summertime, she'll come across the bridge that separates our two homes, wide-eyed, and say to me, "You're not going to believe what I read on the internet this morning." I always have the same response: "You're right. I'm not going to believe what you read on the internet this morning." And you have to learn how to sort all of that out. And if I can take just 30 seconds to, and I think that the governor typically has nailed it when he said people are angry. That's the underlying theme of this campaign. There's a lot of good news going on in America, but people have an anxiety that America is no longer the place of the American dream. Why is that? Let me just tick off. September 11th happened, and it was a terrible attack on America, and to a degree that we didn't fully appreciate at the time, it unmoored the country. They no longer felt secure here. They were under attack from a foreign power that they didn't understand. We had a disastrous war and a disastrous invasion that led to ISIS. At the same time, we had the greatest recession since the Great Depression and bank scandals in which no one on Wall Street went to jail, but across America, people lost their homes and they lost their jobs and they lost hope and what they could always count on. And the millennials today were then young people in those homes, and they saw the consequences of all of that, and they thought, who is responsible for it? Then, of course, we entered an era of social media, which we should be talking more and more about, because it has flooded the atmosphere, frankly, and you don't know very easily which ones to sort out truth, just those that are there for political reasons, or those, and there's some very good reporting on social media, by the way. This year, I was a judge in a contest for the best political reporting of the last year. The top 2 candidates and the winner, they were all working for digital enterprises. It's an entirely new way. So we're in this kind of hurricane of change going on, and we're having a hard time as a country, as a political culture, in sorting out what's in our individual best interest and what's in our collective interest. And 2 candidates who are not beloved across the line. So that's where I think how we got to where we are at the moment.
No, I can't do any better than that.
Maggie, I can't do any better, but I have a little bit of a different perspective. Tom and I have known each other since the 1976 Republican National Convention in Kansas City. And at that time, on any weeknight at 5:30 Central Time, 90% of TV sets in the United States are on ABC, NBC, or CBS. The news media, with the Washington Post, the New York Times, and those 3 networks, they decided what's news. And it was pretty homogeneous, I think you would say. Today, we are under the balkanization of the news media. Conservatives watch conservative news. Liberals watch liberal news. And I won't go into naming names, but I don't think anybody's got a hard time here figuring out who's on whose team.
Remember, you're not going to go into naming names.
Yes, that's right. But we conservatives thought that was going to be great. I was chairman of the Republican National Committee when Fox News began, when Rush Limbaugh really became very popular and had a gigantic 20 million a day listenership. Today, for me, I think that the conservative media elite have become as biased as the liberal media elite, except against the Republican leadership. That it has become about purity. It has become about, if you don't vote right on every subject every time, you're not a good Republican or you're not a good conservative. And what I thought would be really good in spreading out where people got access to a lot of different views has actually become a little bit perverted, that people, as I say, listen to their side, and their side tries to buoy up viewership or listenership or readership by trying to be the purest of the pure. Whether it's some people on MSNBC or whether it's some people on Fox News, that they're going to stake out, if they're Democrats, nobody's going to get to the left of me, and if they're Republicans, nobody's going to get to the right of me. That's something that I never saw coming, just to be honest, but I think we have gotten to that, and it's very hard, like the lady in Montana. When you get on the internet, there's all sorts of really interesting stuff, about a third of which is true.
So I don't mean to suggest that in my comments that this is not an unusual or different election, but I do think that there are some commonalities. So just 3 observations. 1, it's hard to believe that 8 years ago on this stage you had a debate as you had, and we elected Obama to be president. And now we have Donald Trump as a Republican nominee. I would not have thought 8 years later that kind of campaign could have been run and be successful, regardless of whether he had political office before or not, or he started his campaign off by accusing people to the south of our borders, many of them being thugs and rapists and drug dealers. 2, whatever happens at the end of this race, whoever wins, the country's going further left. Trump has a weird position on trade as it relates to the Republican Party. He has a different position, a different instinct when it comes to foreign policy than what you would think of Republicans want to do. Mrs. Clinton is certainly going to be pushed to the left, whether she wants to or not, by the Warren and Sanders faction in the Democratic Party. And 3, there's no doubt the hurt and the pain and the anxiety across the country has produced, and social media has given people these outlets in ways to express them. But there's something else happening, and I don't frankly know. I mean, I follow this. I love politics. I grew up in it. Tried to stay in it. Got kicked out involuntarily. I left it involuntarily 10 years ago in Tennessee. But love it dearly. And I love it so much that I kind of want to figure out what's happening. And there's no doubt, I think everything the governor said and Mr. Brokaw said so eloquently are spot on. But there's something else happening there. And I hope that whatever happens in this election, that voters are satisfied with the outcome, because again, I can't safely say whom I think is going to win this thing.
You both have run campaigns. How do you use social media to manage a campaign, or is that even possible? We had a candidate tweeting at 3 o'clock this morning. So how do you do that? How do you effectively run a campaign using social media, but at the same time manage the message that's going forward?
I can't speak for him, but when I ran, we didn't have social media. No, right. And I was very good at it.
Possibly in the future.
I used to get my email, Maggie, and it would come in, and my assistant would print it out, and I'd get it ink on paper the way God intended. So I have learned to use email here. Got kind of fat fingers for it, but I'm doing the best I can. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it wasn't very prevalent when I was around. I actually think that social media has had a corrosive effect on politics and the discussion of real policy. It's one of the reasons that I'm happy to be here today is because I think Mr. Lack's commitment to this project here is about merging substance with digital media and figuring out ways in which people can learn more. It was great to read on the way down, and I had a 4-hour delay getting here, so I read every newspaper before getting here, and to read the former Defense Secretary Bill Perry's piece in the Times today about nuclear deterrence and this administration's new position on our nuclear arsenal and his opposition to big parts of it and support for big parts of it. Now, well, I've not heard any kind of discussion from either candidate in this campaign. Now, Secretary Clinton was quoted in the piece, or in another piece in the newspaper, because she apparently, in the Times, because she apparently had an off the record set of remarks at a fundraiser where she expressed her views on this. But there's an appalling absence of like real substance being talked about, and I think oftentimes there's no doubt Twitter and I'm glad they're doing well. And this is not to harangue them or besmirch the whole idea, but it has certainly made it harder for substance to be introduced in a real sustained way in the campaign. And Mr. Trump, he has not elevated himself to the point he's at because he is proven to be an expert on Syria, or proven to be an expert on infrastructure, or proven to be an expert on taxes. He just tells you he's going to figure it out, and he has a better plan. The poor guy, Gary Johnson, he probably should just leave the serious question and answer stuff alone, because either that or get a better set of advisors, because it is unbelievable to me that he has not been able, and our network has been a big part of asking, I think, pretty straightforward questions about things happening around the globe. And I thought his last fumble 2 or 3 nights ago with Chris Matthews, where he couldn't name one foreign leader that he respected, not one. And the one he did name, he couldn't name him. He said the former president of Mexico, and his running mate said, "You mean Vicente Fox?" He said, "Yes, that's him." So it's unfortunate that we don't have more substance in this campaign.
You got to remember that presidential politics and the selection of someone is very intuitive at the end. People are, am I comfortable with that person? Can I see that person representing my interest in the Oval Office? How will that person conduct himself or herself during a crisis? And we're going to be seeing more of that kind of judgment coming into play in the coming weeks. I have described the primaries over the years as whatever metaphor you want to choose, an overture, spring training, pregame, and now we're in the serious part of it. And I think that Donald Trump in that first debate underestimated the new environment in which he was going to be performing, quite honestly. And we'll see more impressionistic stuff going along. But the reason that people are going for Donald Trump, and they're the first ones to say that, he has become, for many of them, an agent of change. And they think, whatever the change is, if I have to pull the pin on the grenade and roll it into Washington and blow it up, so be it. We've got to change this country. And I say that against, again, the construct of, in many ways, the country's doing quite well. There's a lot of innovation going on. The poverty rate is down. I mean, Donald Trump could go to New Hampshire and trash the social mores of that state by using vulgar language. They're at 3.9% unemployment in New Hampshire. It's been always, and have 20,000 people standing on their feet and cheering him because they think he's going to get Washington's attention and bring it to its knees. And what are the consequences of that? That's the big issue, I think.
We'd like to encourage, if you have questions, we're going to have microphones in the aisles. We'd like to encourage you to get in line. I'll ask a question while we get ready for that. We've got 2 microphones, and especially our students, we want to hear from you. And my last question, we've been hearing over and over again, and I know I hear it from people all over Mississippi, that we have serious issues. Poverty, we've mentioned that. Jobs, having jobs, education, college debt. And many feel that the media is not pressing these 2 candidates enough on these issues. What is your opinion on that?
I think that's a very fair observation. I find myself in the dual role of being still an active correspondent, obviously an employee of NBC, but because I have more time to sit back and watch at home more often now for a variety of reasons, I long for more of what you have just talked about. And the reason that what's going on is that the lightning is striking all the time in both camps. They're always saying something that say, oh my God, and that's part of the function of news. Look what Trump had to say today. Hillary Clinton stumbled and didn't tell us that she had pneumonia. That preoccupied us for 3 days with good reason. What is the health of her? So getting down into the nitty-gritty of what we are going to do about disparity with health and people at the bottom of the scale, what we're going to do about reforming health care. The Obama plan is working for the bottom third, but it's not working at the top 2/3, and insurance companies are beginning to bail out. This is a really serious issue, and we haven't heard from either one of them about how they would deal with that. We've got an enormous investment in this, and how is it going to end up? How are we going to deal with ISIL? I think it's the defining issue, frankly, of our time. It's not the junior varsity. It's a very sophisticated military operation representing no single ideological or philosophical point of view. It's mostly take down the West. And we have to deal with that in some fashion. And our Western leaders, including Angela Merkel and all the others, would generally get together, but they're so preoccupied with the troubles that they have at home. This business of the country being angry, that's across the Western culture. Right. The Brits voted for Brexit because they didn't quite know why, but they were not happy. The Germans are now turning on Angela Merkel because of all the refugees that she took in. So this is a defining time in American and the Western political culture. And again, I don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but I do think in the next 3 weeks, we ought to have some very, very serious discussion. Organizations like this over the kitchen table at the bars. Up to this point, what I've said about the campaign is the 2 guys at the end of the bar at closing time, you know what they sound like. Well, they have managed to then take over the national political dialogue. And we've got to move it out of the bar and move it to a higher level. I really think so.
Yeah, Maggie, it is not unusual that the news media is fixated on the horse race. There's more coverage than anything else about who's going to win, what do the polls say, this political rumor, that political rumor, and that is abetted considerably by the internet because there is so much flowing over the internet, some true, some not true, but lots of it very titillating. But we hear very little about substance, about real substance, about the differences in policies. And I think that the American people have a real sense things are bad. You know, Wall Street's great, but Main Street, you can't tell the difference between the recession and the recovery. You know, if you're a small business person, in the last few years, for the first time in American history, we've had more small businesses go out of business than to be formed. And that's one of the big drivers of job creation in the United States is small business. But middle class, working class, Main Street, farmers, things are not good for them. The idea that we've got this great economy, their economy is not growing 2%. The whole national economy has averaged 2% growth in the Obama recovery. Compared to the last Great Recession that ended in 1982, same period of years, 86 months, the economy averaged growing more than 4.5% a year, every year in those 7 years. Think about the prosperity that was thrown off by that versus 2%. But what's worse, you go out into rural Mississippi, their economy's not growing 2%. And so people got a right to be mad. They got a right to be scared. And the news media really doesn't cover that. We have managed to nominate the two most negatively perceived candidates for president in the history of polling, at least, and I suspect in the history of our country. And we're going to go to y'all's questions, sir, but I'm going to just make a point. I don't know who's going to win. None of us do. But I'll tell you this. If the election's about Donald Trump, he's going to lose. If the election's about Hillary Clinton, she's going to lose. So get ready that for the rest of this election, Hillary Clinton's campaign is going to be all about what's wrong with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's campaign is going to be all about what's wrong with Hillary Clinton. I think he would actually have a better chance to win, and I think he has a very reasonable chance to win today. I think Tom was right when he said that. The better way for him is to have a campaign about what he would do differently from Obama. Serious substance, what I would do differently, and why it'd work better. And that Ms. Clinton is, as Tom again said, this is an election about change. Hillary Clinton can no more be the candidate of change than I can be the spokesman for Weight Watchers.
And you just heard a perfect example.
I think you'd make a great
why Haley and I have been on these panels since 1976. He gets to deliver those lines, I'm his straight man. So that's how it works out.
Audience, I'm encouraging you again. This is your chance. Here we go.
Good evening. My name is Benjamin Payne. I'm a freshman from Ridgeland, Mississippi. My question for all of you is, what should be my generation's greatest concern coming out of this election, and how can we combat it?
Congressman?
So, again, we're all echoing our leader, Mr. Brokaw here, and then Haley translates it for everybody. So I'll try to say something that we had a panel discussion at a place where I work earlier this week, and we put out a poll for the people in the room. It was primarily women business executives. Well, actually not primarily, it was all women business executives from companies across the country. And the number one concern cited by all in the room was the quality of education in the country, and terrorism and national security and energy and infrastructure fell below that. I think the most important thing for you and your peers here at Ole Miss and across the country is something that's been shared up here and early on. It's not really a political issue. I hope that we can get to a point in our political culture again where people understand that in order to get things done in politics and in public policy making, you actually have to not only work together but listen to one another. I think the chancellor said it best in his remarks that. And the governor touched on it. We talked about the multiplication of media platforms that we have, and people just basically listen to what they want to listen to, what they agree with, and it just recycles and recycles. As a total aside, I say to some of my Democratic friends who are really upset that Donald Trump has done well, I said, look, at least he took Fox on early on in the campaign and obviously survived, because I think if you told someone from the beginning that the Republican nominee would take Fox on, take the number one announcer on the network on, and Megyn Kelly, and even say some of the most unbelievably negative and horrible things to her and about her, and he would still survive, take no money, to Lack's point, didn't spend any money, didn't take the Koch brothers' money, and found himself where he is. So I would hope that what you take from this is a willingness is an understanding in order to make government work, you actually have to work with the other side. And understand that public policy making is not about necessarily liking the other person, it's about getting something done. And politics today has become so personalized that it's defeating itself, because They can't even, Congress just passed a temporary budget, and they finally put money in it to fight Zika. Now, a group of 8-year-olds would have known that we should have spent money way earlier to fight Zika than we waited 7, 8, 9 months to do. The federal government has not passed a budget on time since I was in Congress, before I got to Congress. So you're talking 15, 16 years where all they do each year is just punt the ball until they're forced to do something. And largely because the culture is so broken, because people are unwilling to work, not only listen to one another, but work together. Because listening is fine, but you got to work together to make it work.
Hello, my name is Coleman Arms. I went to Ole Miss. I'm from Dallas, Texas, but I transferred to Delta State. I got to say, go fight no growth. But hotty toddy too. My question is, what do y'all think, being an adopted Mississippian now, what do y'all think is the biggest lesson that these political candidates can learn from Mississippi or the Mississippi culture? And the second part, what do y'all think is the biggest problem facing Mississippi? I hate every year it comes out and Mississippi seems to be last on the list. And what do y'all think is the biggest
problem in Mississippi or in the country?
In Mississippi, facing Mississippi.
Well, I'm an outlier. I've been coming here a long time, but I have such affection for the state. I had friends, oddly enough, in South Dakota from Mississippi who came to work in big construction projects. I'll just tell you one quick anecdote, however, about my presence down here. I have been coming here for a long time, and I do care about it. And I was at a cocktail party at Curtis's house one night talking to my friend Thad Cochran, your senator.
Who's here?
And he's right here. And some wonderful stranger I didn't know came over and put his arm around me. And he said, "Brokaw, we love you so much down here. You come down here all the time. Why don't you just move down here?" And before I could answer, Thad said, "Oh no, we got enough people like Brokaw down here." I honestly, I think I reflect briefly. I delivered commencement this year, as you know, at the University of Mississippi. It's no secret that you've got a lot of difficulties here. And the make up your population, the education level, the poverty level, and all of that. But you are turning out a whole new generation of these state institutions, the University of Mississippi and Mississippi State. And so my challenge to that generation was, you know, if you can just dedicate a lot of the resources that the state has and the education that you've gotten to erasing those gaps that exist in Mississippi, economically, racially, and otherwise, and the same pride that you take in making the Rebs the #1 football team, if you could make Mississippi the #1 state and making gains on education and poverty and health care, it will be a great tribute to your generation. So I left them with the thinking that that should be the cause and the call of your generation. And I think it really is something worth thinking about for the state of Mississippi. That's how I feel.
I would simply say the country and the state have in common, I think, our greatest need is economic growth. Education, gigantic part of that. But everything we do in our country, we can do better if we have a faster growing economy, with more people working, with more people making more money. The same thing's true for Mississippi. The more people that we can get in the workforce and get employed going forward, the more we're able to do to help other things in the state. But if you don't have a strong economy, you can't have a strong military. You will do like we're doing now, little by little, whittling away at our national security capacity. You just almost everything, we would be in better shape as a country and as a state if we had a stronger economy. And I'm going to just say, those people who think the answer for our country is redistribution of wealth and not economic growth don't get what really helps working class people and poor people move up. They need growth. They need the chance to earn and be able to work so that their families can enjoy the prosperity that they deserve. But it's very hard for them to do it in an economy that's growing 1 or 2% a year.
I just want to make one quick observation about that, if I can. I was just at a conference, and I've been spending a lot of time on this very issue. There are 11 million jobs created in the last, I guess, 2.5, 3 years. 80% of them went to college graduates. 20% went to the working class. The era of not having a real skill set is coming. It's in a death knell quite now. You know, there was a time in America where if you had a good pair of work boots, a good set of hands, you could go get a good job somewhere. That's not going to happen anymore. Tom Friedman has written a book in which he's talking about a lifetime of learning. Randall Stevenson, who runs AT&T, one of the cutting-edge companies in this country, said everybody that we hire will spend the rest of their career and the rest of their lives on a learning curve. They're going to have to learn constantly because the adaptation is changing that fast. Just think about our lifetime, or my lifetime. When we first moved to Montana 25 years ago, we couldn't get a television signal. And then there I sit out in my office in the most remote part of America that you can imagine, and I've got access to everything because it's coming in on the internet that we get from the satellite and the telephones, things that we can do. That's the world in which we're now living, and we have to catch up to that. And that change is going to provide more jobs and a better economy, but it takes a big commitment.
For the second time today, Tom's mic quit. Quit in Cleveland, too.
Let's get another question over here. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Robert Grady Pickering, a freshman here at Ole Miss. And for me and many other students here, this is our first presidential election that we can participate in. And I think we would be more excited about it if it weren't for many different outlets and people telling us that these two candidates are the worst candidates in modern history. Do any of y'all agree with what we're hearing about these two candidates simply not being on par with what we've seen in the past?
Andy?
I think you have every right to feel distant or detached from this election for the reason you described. There is an avalanche of distrust that is flooding through this campaign and flooding through the internet that's stirred by a level of paranoia and conspiracy which is unfortunate, deeply unfortunate. But you have to plow through that because you have a responsibility to figure it out like the rest of us. I saw a study, I think David Brooks of the Times wrote about this, that 19% of millennials have found that they are without any trust of anyone speaking about anything around them. They don't trust anything they hear. And the other 81% don't seem involved at all from the basis of where we can try to track them. The only metric we have is that young people distrust what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And I think we've got to find a way to get you to engage. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, other than create a digital first news organization here and pray that you look at it.
Robert, just one point I think is worth making. These are the most negatively perceived. That may not mean to you they're the worst, but they're unquestionably, these are the most negatively perceived. But my mama raised my two older brothers and me, and she used to say life's a series of choices. And you got a choice. Either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton's going to be the next president. And you got to make that choice based on what you think is right. I mean, I know who I'm going to vote for, and I suspect others up here who know who they're going to vote for. But you're down, whether it's your fault or not, you're down to a choice. And you're going to have to make it by November 8th.
Take out a sheet of paper tonight and write down the three things that are most important to you and figure out which one of these I agree with them, they're negatively perceived, but which one of them can help advance those three things. May not be the perfect choice, but who can help advance those three things you care about the most? That's how I'm deciding who I'm voting for, and I'm voting for Hillary Clinton as a result.
Got a question here?
Hi, my name's Ike. I'm from New Orleans. I'm a senior here at the university. And Mr. Brokaw, you said that the biggest issue right now, like, is ISIS. And while I know for a fact we need to destroy ISIS and do away with them, as a young black man, I said this once, I'll say it again, I'm more scared of the police here in Oxford and back in New Orleans than I am of ISIS. And so my question is, how do you think race relations will affect the rest of this race up until November? And if you're willing to, who do you think would be the person to vote in to make those relations better? Because I think it'll be Secretary Clinton, because I think Trump is borderline racist. But I want to know what y'all think.
There is, this is not self-promotional. I grew up in white bread, South Dakota. Now, we did have a big Native American population there, but we were kind of blind to the racial discrimination that went on there. Because I came from a poor working class family, and my father had been really ostracized because he dropped out of school in the 3rd grade, and he had some learning disabilities. And so he was always extraordinarily empathetic to the great black icons of our time. He was not a sports fan. But he never missed a Joe Louis fight. He never missed a Jackie Robinson achievement. His greatest hero was Jesse Owens. Not because he was a sports fan. He knew what they'd gone through in his own way. And that raised my consciousness about the difference between being a lucky white guy in my case, and then being an African American. So from the beginning of my career on, race has been almost the primary issue for me about how we resolve this. And I honestly thought, going back to the beginning of my career, the passage of the Civil Rights Bill, and I was working first in Atlanta and then in Los Angeles during the Watts riots, that we were making great progress. And there's been, as I don't have to tell anybody in this audience, a lot of regression. There is an enormous amount of progress. Harold was a congressman from his home state, Tennessee. I have a number of black friends, men and women, who have gone off to college and have got positions of great responsibility in a lot of areas. When I was starting in television news, there were no black faces, or Hispanic faces, or women, for that matter, on the air. So we have changed that. The biggest issue for me in dealing with race relations is honesty in the dialogue and how they can talk to each other on factual terms. And I don't mean to make this as provocative as it may sound, but for example, there is way too much black on black crime in this country, way too much black on black crime in Chicago and in Baltimore and in other areas. And all of us, white and black and people of whatever shade, need to be as concerned about that as we are about the outrageous, irresponsible, indefensible behavior of some white policemen. There's no question about what has gone on there. But unless we can solve the community from within and have the majority of the white community get involved in that as well and stand side by side with them, we're not going to get this resolved. We're now more separated than I ever thought would be possible at this stage in our life. But it's going to take goodwill on the part of everyone and positive attitudes, not just defensive attitudes. We've got to go to each other and say, how do we get this worked out? Haley may remember this, but when Katrina happened, I came back to the South to say, African-American poverty is not confined to New Orleans. And Haley was concerned about the report that I might be doing. I went to Jackson and spent a lot of time down there. And it actually activated a dialogue in that community across all the lines. Because what happened, we discovered, is that the black families who had the determination to get an education and get out of the inner city and move to the county and become doctors and newspaper editors and lawyers didn't want to rush back into the old black community. They wanted to enjoy their life a little bit. But what was left behind were the people who didn't have those resources. And it's constantly an effort, especially as a white reporter, to go in there and get the honest expression from them. We did this profile of this wonderful young woman in Jackson, in the toughest part of town, who was raising on her own 2 sisters. They were all African American. She was a 23-year-old nursing student, and she got her sisters up in the morning, got them to make breakfast, got them to high school, and did all the right things because her mother had a terrible drug addiction and wasn't around. And I thought she was heroic, and the rest of the community did as well. And we put that on the air, and some black activists got to her and said, Brokaw conned you. He got you to tell lies about your family. And she felt enormous pressure to say the same thing. And it broke my heart because I thought she'd been heroic in what she'd done. Now, I'm not just picking out her, because that happens as well in the majority community. And we can only get this solved if we don't look at each other through the prism of old bias. Pigmentation is a big issue in all of this, and if people can't drop those scales from their eyes, we're not going to get the job done. And if we don't get that job done, we don't go more forward as a country. And I hope, in my dying days, that I see this country coming to grips once again with honesty and determination when they start to deal with race relations. That's how I feel about it.
We're going to move to the next question. We want to get as many of you in as possible, so if you'll make your questions precise and as quick as possible so we can get you quick answers so we can get to everyone. Thank you so much.
Sir. So my name is Jazz Brissack, and given the great contribution made by alternate candidates like Bernie Sanders, do you think that the media's exclusion of other alternative candidates like the Green Party's Jill Stein is a omission that should be remedied?
Well, she hasn't been eliminated. I mean, she's got 2%. That's a little low for this time of the year at this point in the race. But we book her. We book, actually, this is and of course, Sanders went all the way. And as was referenced by Harold, Gary Johnson's had some tough outings in the last couple of rounds, but he got airtime because he's going to be a very important force in this election, because his 9% or 3%, whatever it ends up being, could, in the battleground states, affect the 2 candidates in a way that could throw the election one way or another to Hillary or to Donald. But underneath your point, and I don't think this is widely understood, when there were 16 Republicans on that stage, we tried in the media, I know I'm not alone in this, my colleagues at other networks, we worked really hard to get as many of them as we could and give them as much airtime as we could to make the race competitive, and we couldn't get them. They did not want to come on the air. They did not want to talk. There was a time when we couldn't get when the candidates on the Republican side were down to 4 or 5. They didn't want to come on the air. They wanted to control their messages either through finance, through campaigns, or they wanted to do it at their rallies. But in any case, the independents, we thought there'd be much bigger independents actually in this race. We thought that a Mayor Bloomberg was going to come in at some point, or someone like him to occupy a big part of the conversation. Just didn't happen. And it's a mystery to me that it didn't happen. But I know for the candidates who were on the stage, they had a shot. Their problem was not getting airtime. Their problem was having a point of view that connected widely enough with the states in which they were running in those primaries.
Let's get the next question, please.
Hey, I'm Cody Austin, and I'm a senior public policy student and also the president of the Ole Miss Bipartisan Coalition. So Congressman Ford and Chancellor Vitter have talked about this issue briefly, but I'd like to ask the rest of you, how do you think moving forward past this divisive election that we can make sure that our leaders come together and tackle the nation's issues in a bipartisan way?
Well, I hope we'll have a president who wants to work with Congress and work with both sides in Congress. I don't know if the Republicans can keep the majority in the Senate. I hope they do. But it's going to be a very, very close Senate. It's going to be the Republicans keep the majority in the House. probably with a reduced margin. But we've gone through a period of time where the president has not engaged Congress. He's tried to get around Congress. He's tried to usurp Congress's powers. For the President of the United States to veto the bill that JASTRA that was just vetoed this week and to get one vote in the Senate to sustain his veto, 45 Democrats voted against him. I mean, that is evidence of one thing and one thing only, not trying. And we need a president who tries to work with Congress in a bipartisan way. And then we need more people like Thad Cochran that want to get the job done rather than worry about the next election. And I hope we'll have
that. Hi, my name is Catherine Aberly, and I am a senior here at Ole Miss. My question is related to the girl that asked one before me, but in a primary season that saw millennials overwhelmingly in some states vote for Bernie Sanders, and one that Donald Trump, a rogue candidate, has been elected the Republican nominee, although they both ran as Democrat and Republican, my question is a major third party necessary, and is it possible?
Wants to tackle that?
Well, let me just say, today it's not possible, okay? I mean, today, third-party candidates maybe can change the outcome between the two national candidates like Perot did in helping Clinton. But we're not going to elect a third-party candidate now. That doesn't mean we can't get to that down the road, but the two-party system has actually served our country well over 240 years. We would do better if we would get back to operating the two-party system in the ways that brought some of the greatness to America in the 20th century, and before then, of course. But I actually believe having people that, when I was governor, I had a Democrat majority in the House every day I was governor. And I had a Democrat majority in the Senate every year but one. But we got things done because we were dedicated to working to try to get things done for the people. And if the two-party system works like that, then people won't care about having a third party. But both parties have to be broader. Neither party can be pure. As Harold will tell you, in the two-party system, purity is the enemy of victory. My old boss, Ronald Reagan, used to say, remember, a fellow agrees with you 80% of the time is your friend and ally. He's not some 20% traitor. And we need to run our two parties like that today.
The state of California has an open primary system where any and everybody jumps in the race and they run for various seats. We have a Senate race happening there right now where the two people who are the finalists to succeed Barbour Boxer in the U.S. Senate are both Democrats. Now, one's a little more liberal than the other. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, if they'd gone the traditional route, it's likely a Republican nominee in California for Senate would lose and a Democrat would be advantaged. It at least makes it more interesting and gives people an opportunity to say, well, I may not have wanted that Democrat, but I'm going to pick a conservative Democrat. If I'm a Republican, I'm a liberal, I'm going to pick a more liberal Democrat because I'm going to be with that person. One thing I think can happen, we might envision in the near term, is looking at presidential races where any and everybody jumps in and we run and let everybody go to the polls and vote, and you take the top two vote getters. It may be two Republicans sometimes, two Democrats, or it may be a Democrat and Republican. Let the parties endorse whom they want to endorse so Democrats will know who the best Democrat is, at least in the eyes of the parties. But I look forward to a day. I understand exactly what Governor Barbour said, but I think we've passed that moment. I think because technology and other things are so prominent and continue to grow and continue to improve, I look forward to a day where the parties are relevant but not dominant. I look forward to a day where voters can say, look, I want to know who the Republicans like, Democrats like, but I want to listen to Jill Stein. I personally don't, but if people want to listen to Jill Stein or they want to listen to Gary Johnson, they have every right to. But one thing you have to understand, I think a lot of millennials didn't appreciate doing the race was Bernie Sanders lost the primary. Now, we have a venerable tradition in this country. If you lose your primary, you go and you should support the other person in your party as opposed to just sitting back. Now, we may reach a point where people don't want to do that anymore. You may say, well, I'm sick of that. I voted for Bernie and no one's close to Bernie. So maybe we get to a system that's an open primary system. But until we get there, Governor Barbour's right. Bernie Sanders, I think, went a little overboard. I think he overplayed his hand. Had he jumped out a month earlier, he might have been able to negotiate more things for himself. It might have made you and others happier who may have voted. I don't mean to put you in a Sanders camp, but you sound like you might. I mean, it might have made you happier had you been able to get more of the things you wanted into the political lexicon today. But the governor's right. We're in a two-party system, and you have two choices. And I hope you think long and hard about the choice you make.
And there's an enduring rule about politics. Sooner or later, your heart will be broken, and you just have to deal with that.
Hi, my name is Liam. I'm a freshman here at the university. I was going to ask a question about third-party candidates, but I'll spare you, and I'll ask a question about social media. So earlier you were talking about how on social media it's difficult, if not impossible, to have substance and to discuss actual policy. But it's also undeniable that social media is it's both helpful for candidates to gain popularity, and it's also is in our everyday lives it's a huge factor. So I'm wondering how candidates can use social media effectively and with substance in the future, as it becomes an increasing role in the elections.
Well, I think they really can. The point I was trying to make is be careful, because a lot of what comes across the social media turns out not to be true, or not to be exactly like it sounds, but it is an incredible tool. I mean, phenomenally incredible tool. It just, you don't have editorial boards that have to screen whether something can be put on the air. But no, it's a powerful, powerful tool. Just be careful that you fact check.
You get the question?
Hi, thank you all for being here. Pardon me for being a little under the weather when I ask this question. First, if I may, I just want to say to Congressman Ford, I'm a senior in college, and I have started every day that I can remember with Morning Joe on MSNBC.
You're a good man, young man. You're a good man. You're a good man.
I love the round table discussions that y'all have, and it means a lot to me, so I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
And give them my best, please.
Thank that gentleman right there, too, Mr. Lack.
Yes, thank you, sir, so much. My question is, it seems that the tough primary fight that Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton had this year has led to Secretary Clinton crafting an education plan that seems idealistic, but hopefully possible. And I was just wondering, with the tough political climate that we're in, how likely you think something as ambitious as her plan is
You mean her higher ed plan, the college plan?
Yes, sir. For 125,000, those people who are in that income bracket or lower to get tuition free. And I think, if I'm correct, those over that to be debt free. I'm not entirely sure what that term means, but as opposed to tuition free. But
so I share some of your concerns about the Secretary's higher ed plan. I think a lot of it was influenced by Senator Sanders and even by Senator Warren from Massachusetts. I would have to hope that if she's elected, that there would be a serious sitting down and a willingness to sit down with governors and across the country, and even community college leaders across the country, to figure out how you do this in a way that is affordable. But your concerns, you didn't enumerate all of them, but I think, broadly speaking, I share some of your concerns, because from a policy-making standpoint, it's difficult to see how you transition from that policy into a workable, affordable college-ready plan.
I have one very big issue with it. One of the really compelling issues for me at this stage in my career as a journalist and as a citizen, as a father, is that we don't ask enough of each other. And this is a perfect example. When Bernie Sanders said we're going to give free college education to children and families making $125,000 a year, it was a kind of a nirvana. It had no root in reality whatsoever. And then Hillary picked it up. She should have said, and if you qualify for this, at the end of those 4 years, you owe this country 2 years of public service. And,
I would agree.
there is no free lunch here. And I would add to that, I think it's a moral outrage for a democracy to send less than 1% of its population into uniform and into harm's way and to take all of the wounds and the deaths. And by the way, the military is the most racially democratic institution that we have. You can learn from that about how they deal with each other and train together and the leadership that comes out of the African American community. I just want one more coda to what I said earlier, because I don't want anyone to think that I just see this through the prism of a white man. I went to South Chicago 15 years ago to do a story on an all-white German-American farming community that had been there for a long time, deep, deep South Chicago. And then a developer came in and started putting in affordable, nice homes. And the African-American professional community in Chicago began to move down there. They were affordable, they had good schools, the children would be safe, and it should have been a textbook case of how you can work together. The white flight began immediately, for no good reason. It began immediately. They began leaving because they said, the value of my house will go down, I don't understand the culture. And I understood the rage of those black executives and civil servants who had come down there. And it breaks my heart to tell you that now, 15 years later, it's no longer an integrated community. It's about 80% black. And they don't have any more crime. The schools are still doing well. But the whites took off. And that was a terrible commentary on the commitment that we all have to make to solve these problems. And free college is a perfect example of that. You've got to pay back in some fashion. And I don't think that we ought to, because I know what will happen. The majority community will take big advantage of that right away. And we've got to find a way to level all this off and to acknowledge and recognize at the same time the terrible sacrifices that are being made by our military.
Okay. Let me apologize. We have far spent our time. We could be here all evening. This has been a fascinating.
You've got to let this young lady. She's stood for 15 minutes.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, the reason he says that, she's another fan of Harold's, so we want to hear from her.
I'm so sorry, but you can get your questions in later. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a junior here. My mom is from Jackson. My dad's from Clinton. They met at Delta State. My mom went to med school at UM in Jackson, and they left as fast as they could. And me and my sister were born and raised in Texas. And I see that a lot in my classmates, that they love Mississippi. They love their experiences here, but they don't think that they can do what they want to do and stay in the state. What needs to be done to inspire the youth to stay in Mississippi and make it possible for what we are interested in as a generation to thrive in the South and in Mississippi?
You bring back the point that I tried to talk about earlier. It's 50 years ago when I was here, you can't imagine the out-migration. All of my friends who didn't have a family farm or a family law practice or a family business thought that they should leave Mississippi and go somewhere else, and that they would have brighter futures. We've made that a lot better for doctors in our state, but we've got to continue to grow our economy. Our economy is more diverse than most people realize, but it's still not as diverse as we'd like to have it. To have Toyota or GE Aviation or Winchester or a bunch of the big, huge Northeast Mississippi Regional Hospital, which is the largest rural health system in the United States. I mean, there's a bunch of really good stuff that's happened up here. We just got to keep our foot on the accelerator, and we need people like you to stay and be part of that, whether it's to stay in Oxford or in Jackson or Tupelo or South Haven or the coast. But so many things become possible if you have a strong and growing economy that throws off good jobs. And that's why I said earlier, that's the most important thing that we can do for our state and, frankly, for our country right now.
Thank you so much. Didn't we have a wonderful panel? Aren't they awesome?